talk this.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your full perfect combo host, Madelyn.
I'm your, oh god, what are buttons? Host, Emma.
And thanks for tuning in to this week's show. It's Side Quest season, by which I mean it's Side Quest week, and it's Emma's week, Emma's season. So, Emma, what is the topic of today's Side Quest episode?
This episode, we're talking about rhythm games.
Woo!
Just in general. Yeah. Exactly. Just
a little bit of rhythm for you there.
Rhythm video games, I guess I should say.
I guess that is important to know.
The history of clapping or anything.
Can you imagine? I come out, I was like, I started today. We're going to take it way back to the 20th century BCE.
Exactly, yeah.
Emma, what inspired... I thought about doing rhythm games as a topic.
What inspired
recently.
you?
I don't know what inspired me. I was just thinking about types of games.
I see.
That's usually what I do when I come up with side quests. I'm like, what's a type of game? Once I get through my usual seasonal ones, I'm like, game type. But what inspired you? What inspired the side quest choice?
Just a variety of things this time. I just played Hi-Fi Rush, which you'll probably hear more about in 2 to 3 weeks.
3 weeks,
on
right?
How we handled the PAX episode.
Yep.
So I just played that. A new Theorhythm game, Final Fantasy Theorhythm.
I always thought it was Theatrhythm. A new Final Fantasy themed rhythm game with a sort of portmanteau title that we can't pronounce.
Theatrhythm came out like last month. The era of Trombone Champ was still relatively recently. I was watching a streamer in the background during work who's just started Yakuza 0, and she played Bakamitai for like 2 hours to get a perfect score. I
gotta say, you put that in the notes, and Bakamitai is not that hard. It shouldn't take 2 hours to get a perfect score.
Whatever.
I just wanted to throw that out there.
Madelyn did chorus, so that's worth throwing out
there. The whole theme of this episode is going to be me being sort of baffled by people who don't have rhythm. I do have to get that elitism.
Madelyn studied singing, so. And I've also been watching Idolish 7's anime adaptation, which is one of the more popular rhythm idol games. In idol being IDOL, not IDLE, in Japan. So a variety of things.
I'd like for there to be an idol rhythm game. That would be pretty funny. Just
I don't know how that would. It wouldn't be a rhythm game, but
it'd be a music
video. Could probably do that. Yeah,
I'd support it. Do you feel like we are in the midst of a rhythm game renaissance, Emma?
I mean, I guess so. I've definitely taken notice, I guess, of a lot more of these sort of hybrid rhythm games in the last couple of years, which are like games that incorporate rhythm, but are also something else, right? Like your typical rhythm game is like you have your buttons of some sort, and you're pressing the buttons when they hit the circle, right? Yep. However that's laid out or however that's done, that's sort of like the basic rhythm game. But lately, over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of stuff like Hi-Fi Rush that just came out that is a rhythm game, right? In that there's a lot of rhythm elements to it, but it's also character action. So a lot of those where they're kind of like smushing rhythm on top of something else. Like they're doing our mashup.
That's what I was about to say. Stuff with big talk this mashup energy. But
they got Hatsune Miku and something else, and they had to mash them together.
I guess it's a rhythm game, but a roguelike?
Yeah.
So as is my usual want with these sorts of themed episodes, I think both of us did this a little bit, but I feel like I'm usually the person who's like, let's do the history dive. So are we ready? Are we ready for the history of rhythm games here?
I'm ready for the history of rhythm games, Madeline. Please do Madelin's real life lore corner, please.
Yeah, Madelin's real life lore corner, also known as a little history lesson. So usually, like in most of these, like articles and videos, they throw it back to Dance Aerobics, which was a Nintendo Power Pad game, where you did some dance aerobics. Wikipedia does mention a 1970s arcade rhythm game that the idea was that you'd lift girls' skirts in time to some rhythm. So thanks. I hate it.
Yeah.
So maybe rhythm games go back that far, but everyone else seems to have chosen to ignore the lift, do the panty exposure to the beat games. So now I will as well.
Yes.
But the game that really launched the rhythm game genre, and launched a lot of other stuff, and Emma, you are right that it should probably go in the hat,
yes.
Is Parappa the Rapper in 1996. Which we will probably talk about more later on.
I knew Parappa the Rapper was like an important game, but I didn't really realize his influence. I think I should make an image of Parappa. Just his impact. He deserves it.
I like that. Around the same time, as that was happening, there was also Konami in Japan was realizing that rhythm games could be a huge market for the arcade scene. So we also, right there in 1997, saw the release of Beat Mania, which is sort of like a DJ-style arcade game that was such a success that they created a whole separate arm of the company for rhythm games called Bimani, which sounds kind of like Konami and is also based on Beat Mania. So a good name, I would say. Mm-hmm. That's how I name things too, a good name. And of course, we then saw the emergence of Dance Dance Revolution in 1998. We talked about a lot about the controllers for a lot of the games that we're going to talk about here today in an earlier side quest. I feel like this side quest was recent, but I know that it actually wasn't recent. I'm sure it was sometime this fall. I was like, a recent side quest, and then I'll go back and be like, that was 2021. I know it wasn't that far back. But there was a lot of other stuff that was happening in Japan during this. I mean, DDR was huge, and DDR did make the leap to the States. But as I think is going to be a theme throughout this episode, overall, there are just way, way, way more rhythm games in Japan.
Yes. Than
there are in the West.
Yes.
Especially during certain discrete periods of rhythm games falling out of favor in Western markets. But I didn't even realize there was a Japanese predecessor to Guitar Hero that they just basically stole.
Yeah.
So that was Guitar Freaks, which was I think it was sometimes an arcade game and also sometimes a home console game, maybe. But that came out 6 years before Guitar Hero. It came out in 1999. Along with there was a drumming one too that also had sort of a silly name.
Yeah.
And that stuff didn't come over to the States because people thought that people wouldn't buy peripherals, which boy were they wrong, right?
Yeah.
But at the time, that was a big reasoning for it, is that it was popular in Japan, but they didn't think people in the West would be willing to buy the guitar controller. Until finally, right, we saw Guitar Hero emerge, and along with it, the great rhythm game boom of the mid-aughts, right? Which all happened much faster than I remember it happening, by the way. Rhythm games were huge for 2 years, 3 years, in which time they released 20 Guitar Heroes, totally saturated the market, plus a million rock bands.
Oh yeah, I saw a reference in one article, I can't remember which one it was, but it was referencing a Rolling Stones article of it was the one on Gotcha, maybe the one on Engadget. Yeah. That was it made $1.3 billion one year and then went down to 300 million
Yeah.
the next year, which, like, I mean, that's still a lot of money, but, like, the contrast there
it was
a lot.
a huge boom and bust, and we will probably talk later about some of the reasoning behind that, right? There's definitely a lot of things, both internally and externally, that led to that kind of crash of the rhythm game market. But at its height, music games, in which were primarily, Guitar Hero, Rock Band, etc., represented about 18% of the entire video game market in 2008. So they, like, surpassed sports games, right? Like, they became, like, I think the second leading genre of games by the time of that. And then it, like, totally crashed. By 2013, and even for some of them even before that, pretty much all of these development divisions had shut down.
I mean, I remember having a lot of rhythm games.
Yeah.
Like, we had various Guitar Heroes. The community center places had, like, Rock Band.
Yep.
We had, like, one of the Taiko games, even,
we definitely
with its
did.
peripheral. I think I had at least one Rhythm Heaven on
We had DDR.
the DS. We had DDR. Yeah. That's a lot.
And we
with
played
all
them
of
a
its
lot.
different peripherals.
I do have to say, I'm sure this isn't real, but I identify us as having been ahead of the curve on Guitar Hero.
I have no idea. And of course we had of course we had dancing games too, which are a little bit of a different genre, but related.
Yeah, definitely. They emerge from this for sure. But even as rhythm games in the West kind of crashed, rhythm games in Japan continued to be popular, right? 2005 also marked the debut of Idol Master, and idol-themed rhythm games became and are still very, very popular in Japan. But in the West, the 2010s were the domain of Just Dance and of phone rhythm games, right? As well as an attempted return of Guitar Hero and Rock Band in kind of a new games-as-service model that didn't ultimately work great.
Yeah.
Did not lead to the great return. Although it's important to keep in context, like Emma said, like $300 million is still a lot of money to be making in a game genre that had been deemed really, really niche before that. So it's more of just there was a huge bubble that then burst back down to earth.
Yes, exactly.
But now we're starting to see rhythm games have a little bit of a renaissance. I mean, it's been coming for a long time. It's been sort of the domain of these often indie kind of crossover game type things, like Emma's saying, these hybrid rhythm games. So things like, we talked about BPM, bullets per minute, on the show, right? These like first-person shooter, these rhythm shooters, things like Crypt of the Necro Dancer, things, of course, like Beat Saber is like the VR game. So there's rhythm games that seem to be re-emerging in a different way, perhaps a moment in the spotlight once again.
Yeah, I think even you can point to like for the West specifically, like different franchises that are, anime-y getting more popular over here, like Persona, for instance, has its own like rhythm game spin-offs for those, right? Kingdom Hearts made a rhythm game spin-off. There's Theatrhythm has been around for a while.
Theatrhythm.
Theatrhythm? Has been around for a while, so I feel like you see those cropping up more now too. But it is like, you look at those and you're like, oh, like rhythm games never went away in Japan, right?
Yeah,
like they've been doing those left like spin-offs. They're various mobile game titles for boys and girls. And the DDR, of course, is still in their arcades. They have more arcades in Japan than I think we do here still.
Yeah.
So I couldn't find I looked into this a little bit. I didn't find like a really great answer on why rhythm games stayed so much more popular in Japan than they did in the West. But I do think it's a combination of things. They started introducing all of these idol-themed mobile games that caught on. Their arcades stuck around longer than they necessarily have in like the US or anywhere else as a whole. others, like just like a combination of staying power that, or just making more even, really. Like you can talk about like Harmonix and whoever made Rock Band. I don't remember. Activision?
No, Harmonix made, sorry, I'm going to check this. Harmonix made, it's confusing because Harmonix made the first Guitar Hero and then they split off.
I see.
So Harmonix then eventually made Rock Band, but I think I can't remember. I have this in my notes somewhere. I'll look it up.
But what I'm saying is, like, there were not a lot of Western, like, dance games, sure, but, like, pure rhythm games like Guitar Hero, there weren't a lot of Western developers making those versus, like, even the ones I listed of the ones that we had, other than, like, Guitar Hero, those were all Japanese-developed games.
It was Neversoft, alongside Activision as the publisher for Guitar Hero after the first one.
Yeah. There's also, like, to contrast that even more, like, and you bring this up sometimes, the Guitar Hero and Rock Band was very centered around licensed music.
Yes.
Whereas a lot of other rhythm games will have their own music, right? Or will have, like, voice actors like on staff to sing music in case of the idol ones, right? Mm-hmm. Like those are their roles, so they make that music. Or you have like the Rhythm Heaven type music that's in there, but It's not as dependent. The whole industry over there is not as dependent on licensed songs, or if they are, it's their own licensed songs, I guess is what I was trying to say.
Well, I'll dig into that a little. So I read an interesting article on this that, look, all of this is like broad generalizations, right, of what's popular in each of these kind of like three core rhythm game markets of the US, in Japan, and in China, right? And first of all, the contrast that like in Japan, rhythm games have like about 6% of the total market share of their iOS, like their phone gaming market, their Apple phone gaming market. And it's like 9 times as big as China and 39 times as big as in the US. I don't know if that's proportional or if that's actual numbers, but still gives a sense of how much more popular these games are in that market than they are in China or in the US. So this kind of broke it apart as in the US, like the most important thing, like Emma said, is the music, right? There's right now especially a lot of like very casual, simple games where the popular music is really the draw. And also in the US, like that many of these like much larger popular games, like things like Roblox. I mean, Roblox, of course, is a metaverse experience, as we all know, but like rhythm games are built into other games as well. And so that is one thing to kind of bear in mind, is that rhythm games have invaded as mini games into many, many, many other large properties. So if you're counting the number of people who play rhythm games, there are probably more than get swept up just in people who play on their phones. But in the US, the music is really important. In Japan, it's all about like character collector type things, often centered around these idle games, most of which feature, like Emma said, original music from the in-game musicians, or if it's like something like a Miku game, like original music from Vocaloid performers. And then in China, there are also character collectors, but the most popular game there, called QQ Dance, is sort of like a more like the rhythm game is more complicated in its mechanics than the ones often are in the US and Japan. And whereas in Japan, people are often there for like these like long running stories, in China, what really monetizes it is there's like all sorts of cosmetics, basically, which is what drives the in-app purchases there. Like there's a rhythm game, but also like you can have pets and you can raise a child and you have a home and you're like buying cosmetics for that. So it was interesting to me to have these kind of like 3 different takes on something that can often feel like, well, rhythm games are kind of the same.
Yeah. And like I said before, I do think there's a lot of stuff in the indie scene now.
Oh, yeah.
That's inspired by various types of rhythm games that are coming up now. But I don't know if we'd ever really see something like another Guitar Hero or Rock Band.
Well, I think, like we talked about in our gaming peripherals episode, I wouldn't be shocked if and when VR really gets its moment in the sun, if we saw a resurgence of something like that.
I actually think a lot the barrier is licensed music.
That is true.
Actually. But because one, it's expensive, and because two, realistically, there is promotion that happens through YouTube or Twitch, right?
Yep.
And if your stuff is based on licensed songs, you can't do that. That market's out, right? There's no marketing you can do there.
Well, so to throw it back to the demise of the Guitar Hero era, that is something, and you brought this up, that gets cited in a few different ways. So one of them is the pure expense, right? So as the bubble was starting to burst, you do see quotes from that time period of kind of like the publishers being like, we need to cut back on what we're paying for this music, right? It's expensive. We need to cut back on it. Of course, it's also the entire draw of the game, so it's a difficult kind of catch-22. You're in there, right?
Yeah.
The licensed music is the whole draw of the game, so if you cut back on what you're spending on it, then the game is less exciting and fewer people buy it, and you have less money to spend on licensed music, so the game gets less exciting, fewer people buy it, etc. But you mentioned it coinciding very much with the rise of music streaming, which was something I saw mentioned a little bit too, that I think is another really interesting angle as to why those games, just the bubble burst like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know.
Well,
like I said, I looked into this and I was like, I don't know.
I mean, I'll agree that I got a pretty surface level understanding of it, but part of what I picked up was this idea that, like, okay, like, having your song in Rock Band is a great promotional tool, right?
Yeah.
And so on one hand, like, you don't need that as much, especially in these early days of streaming when it's, like, exciting and not everyone was cognizant of the fact that they were getting totally ripped off by Spotify or whatever. But also just the consumer attitudes toward music changed right around that, like, 2008, 2009 time as things like Pandora and Spotify and all of this were really rising. That before that, you know, you had the expectation that you were buying CDs, right? And you were paying for music. And as streaming became more and more popular, the idea of buying a game where most of the draw was the music, but then also the idea of buying additional DLC, like as folks were moving away from that being the primary model of consuming music, like buying a song on iTunes, it made it even more difficult to justify the purchase price of these games for folks, because music, basically as an entire art form and industry, was beginning its descent into being systemically undervalued for all but the, like, most in-demand artists.
Yeah.
Feels like that's got to get fixed someday, but there's so many things that feel like they have to get fixed someday.
It's so true. You should just go back to the halcyon days of Parappa the Rappa.
Except we can't even go back to the halcyon days of Parappa the Rapper because our TVs can't even do it.
Yeah, I thought this. I didn't think about this, but a lot of times when you have, especially like console rhythm games or anything with rhythm elements, there'll usually be a way that you can check like your latency, right? It'll test it for you. Sometimes it'll be in the form of like a tutorial, and it'll do it in the background. But basically, like, there's ways where you'll be able to set it up so that the game can understand, like, how behind you are or how ahead you are in general based on your settings, and then can set the game so that it feels like everything's in sync properly to the player, right?
Yeah.
But that's more of a modern invention based on the fact that various TVs and systems are set up so that there's actually sort of a lag between, like, something happening and what you see. of like a few milliseconds up to like half a second, depending on what your TV is like. But of course, older TVs did not do this. Just showed you immediately. I don't understand TVs, so I'm sorry that I'm
We talked about this a little bit last week. Again, I will also say
Yeah.
I don't really understand TVs, but something about the older model, I think because everything was much more hardwired.
Yeah.
I think it has to do, at least some of it has to do with controllers being primarily wireless now.
Yeah, so it's hard to go back to older rhythm games because they do not have any sort of set your latency option. And that means that it feels off when you play it, even if it's not necessarily off. Like what you're pressing and what you're seeing on the screen don't quite match. And in the case of Parappa the Rappa, they did release a remaster of it somewhat recently, like 5 years ago or something. But they didn't update it to include any like check your lag option. So it's hard to play because it doesn't feel right. You will always be rapping bad, unfortunately.
It's probably more realistic that way.
It's okay. It's not even a game, so.
That's true. He was not very sure it was a game.
Nobody knew whether it was a game.
That's so weird to me. Like, obviously it's a game. What else would it be?
I just thought all those interviews were really interesting of, like, it just wasn't, like, they were really focused on, like, cutting edge type stuff, and they come up with, like, Parappa the Rappa, and they're like, what is this? Well, how do we sell this?
Yeah.
I don't understand. But then it came out and it did well.
Yeah.
Especially the US branch of Sony was like, we don't understand what to do with this. And then it did well, and both, like, they were like, wow, rhythm games are cool, and they were also like, wow, neat idiosyncratic games are cool. Which is why you had sort of the early Sony, like, playing around with stuff. It's all thanks to a little guy called Parappa.
The Rappa.
And he was also, like, their mascot for a while.
He's a pretty
like Mario.
cool. He's a cool mascot.
He is.
Despite not even being from a game.
Yeah, I know. Was it even a game? Pressing buttons on the beat? Is that a game?
That seems to be something that comes up over and over and over throughout the history of rhythm games. Like, just people doubting that people want to press buttons to the beat.
Don't they know people? I love
I
pressing
know,
buttons to the beat.
Have you never played a rhythm game? Like, this came up, the guy who made Rhythm Doctor, which is sort of like basically a take on Rhythm Heaven, more or less. This, like, one button. The gimmick of it, I won't say gimmick because it looks like a pretty good game. The conceit of it is that, like, in Rhythm Doctor, you always have to, the goal is always to press the thing on the 7th beat. Like, that's the thing. It's a one button game. And you'd think nobody played Rhythm Heaven. Like, Rhythm Heaven is a one button game, right? That's what Rhythm Heaven is. But everyone was still like, I don't know. That doesn't sound fun. It's like, man, have you ever played a rhythm game? They don't sound fun until you're there trying to get that high score on the Sephiroth level for, like, the 3rd straight hour.
Yeah.
I could hear the button presses to that in my head.
Incredible.
That was a dark time for Click Like Boyfriend and me.
It was.
Just, like unrelated to that game. Just a dark time for the world, really. That fall.
It was.
Anyway. That's as good a segue as any into, I think, one of the challenges of making a good rhythm game is the balance between accessibility and the players who want to get really, 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 really good.
It is sort of like, it's a genre where your presentation, like, super matters.
Yeah.
Not that it isn't true for all genres, but you really have to be like, you can't just stick stuff in a menu confusingly, like RPGs.
Yeah.
And people deal with it. Like the way the thing looks has to be clear and readable and understandable and appealing. And that's like a very key very key part of making a rhythm game that feels good to play and is relatively easy to pick up.
It's fascinating to me because on the surface, whatever, this is true of all games, right? But on the surface, a rhythm game doesn't feel like it should be hard to make, right? It's like, okay, you have your like little, like pick your little icons, have them scroll down the little highway in whatever way you want, and like, boom, you got a rhythm game. But it does make me think of, do you remember how, like, in addition to having DDR, we also had like a disc that was like, make your own DDR?
Yeah.
And that sucked. That was really bad. Because there's
I think
really
there's stuff that like Beat Saber has that, maybe. I believe.
Well, a lot of games have that. Like that is something that I think is involved in a lot of rhythm games. Is the stuff that like can like either auto generate your own thing. Beat Saber definitely has it, or where there's sort of community content building. And man, yeah, it just really shows you that it's not just as simple as being like, I'm gonna throw some arrows and you're gonna step on them.
Man, I remember, did we like load in like an audiobook once?
Yeah, I remember that. Early innovators in the rhythm game genre, the Doctus sisters.
But yeah, I mean, but it's very base level, like we were saying. Like everything has to be in sync. It's sort of, it reminds me of like people talking about fighting games a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? Like you want your input to go in, no lag. And that's very much true for rhythm games too, because if you're feeling like you're hitting it on the beat and the game tells you that you're not, that makes it a frustrating experience.
Yeah.
And it's sort of ruining the whole point of the game. So like, that's really important to get in. So it's also important that you're clear if you have visual cues, right? That the visual cue is clear on like when you're supposed to hit it, right? A lot of things will have like circles going in that when they get to like, you know, the smaller circle, you hit it when it lines up, right? For instance. Or
I actually
if something's
personally, I just have to
scrolling-
throw in a personal thing here. I actually personally hate the circle input of like, I find it confused. I'm like, exactly where am I supposed to hit it? Because I feel like with some games, it's different than others. Anyway.
You'd also might have like scrolling ones where different buttons inputs will go up to like their corresponding circle and like scroll past it. They might not be circles, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
They'll go down to like their corresponding spot and scroll past it when it's on the
line.
spot.
Yeah.
On the line, you press it. There's other ones, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah.
So, but those have to be like clear. I was noticing the same Bakamitai one, is that on the dancing minigame, which is another rhythm game in Yakuza, they have like the squares going in to the square, and then you press it when it lines up with the square. But these originally came out on PlayStation. And so while the buttons are Xbox, if you happen to be playing on Xbox, the squares that are going in correspond to what that button would be on PlayStation, color-wise. Which is unfortunate, because I think, like, the X button is also blue on Xbox, but it's not where the X button is on...
Yeah.
So it'll go in blue, but it's not to the blue button.
You wonder why they didn't change that, right? Do you think they didn't change it just because they didn't notice? Or do you think they didn't change it because changing the color would break everything in the game?
Button remapping, if that's like a very specific thing, right?
Yeah.
Like games will have that when they're like telling you controls, it'll automatically have the button of the controller that you're using.
Yeah.
But your visuals aren't necessarily part of that.
Right.
So I think that that's part of like the visual display, and so it would have been a bigger undertaking
Right.
to do than just changing the buttons, unfortunately.
They can't just go in and do like the little color wheel and be like, we're gonna do this color.
I don't think so.
It's not that easy.
I don't know.
It's
I don't know.
It's not like Canva.
I have no idea. I was just noticing it. I was like, man, that makes it more difficult to look at. Because they're trying to use color coding to like indicate what button to push, but the color coding's wrong.
Yeah.
So it's no longer helpful.
Oops.
Oopsie.
I also appreciate that the karaoke in Yakuza goes through a few different, like, similar but not quite the same iterations over the course of the series.
Mm-hmm.
Some better and fairer than others, I think. Mm-hmm. I feel like in Zero, it does do the thing where it jumps from staff to staff. And that gets into something.
It also changes its momentum.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Is
that jump scares you with the fast ones sometimes.
With me, more often it was a slow jump scare. It was like I knew something would come. I was like, I gotta be ready, and then it is slow. But that's another thing that I think separates a good rhythm game from a great rhythm game is how fair that difficulty is. I think we both watched this video from Design Doc, which I think is where this was from, although this is mentioned in some other places as well. The idea of making it possible for the player to sight read, right? Which has to do with, you know, making sure that the inputs appear in a way that is visible and early enough and that doesn't, like, they give plenty of examples of games where it's like sudden tempo shift, right? And that's fine for, you know, the kind of like extreme difficulty players who are going to memorize everything anyway to get the high score.
Yeah.
But for someone playing through a level for the first time, what can feel really great about the rhythm game is when you get through it and it feels like you've been challenged, but in like a fair way.
Yes. The idea is that as long as you're not jumping into like super ultra extreme difficulty that we watched our sister do on her Miku game.
The kids are so much. They should bring back Guitar Hero because she would destroy it.
That's true.
I know it's not the same. They should bring back whatever the Japan DJ one was. So I say Beatmaster. It's not Beatmaster. No, Beatmania. Beatmaster is a phone game. Beatmania.
Like if you're like just going into normal level rhythm game for the first time, you should have some idea of what's happening. Basically, is the idea. You shouldn't be like, what? I've got nothing here. I don't know what you want me to do. I don't know what's happening. There should be some level of like, okay, like I get it, even if you're like messing up a little bit, you know?
Exactly. Like it can take, obviously you want it to take time to be able to master the game, but you don't want all of that mastery to be contingent on, I've memorized what's going to come next.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's like subtle and less subtle ways. Like, of course, the idea of like a sudden tempo change, like I think is that at its most extreme. But on a less extreme level, like there are plenty of games. I think I was seeing this with Beat Saber specifically, where it's like sometimes inputs will appear and you can't really quite see them because of how the UI is lined up.
Yeah.
And that can be kind of frustrating as well, right? So it can kind of range from irritating, but maybe not quite unfair, all the way up to, well, if you do like a sudden stop in the game that there's no way I could have predicted, that kind of sucks.
Yeah. One thing, like, especially when it starts getting faster, you might get, like, inputs overlapping with each other, for instance, depending on what they look like. And that's, like, one example outside of just, like, the Beat Sabers, like, they're coming at you really fast and have, like, a vague arrow that points you in the direction you're supposed to slash them. But another example, a more typical rhythm game might be like they're just stacked on top of each other, in which case you might want to do something like one of the examples in the Design Doc one was like DDR does like different colors depending on like what type of note it is.
Yeah.
So that sort of help you as you're in it to sort of identify what it is so that you're like, oh, it's a triplet coming up next, for instance. So you might do something with color or some other way.
Absolutely. It's just all, I mean, anytime we dive into any genre, it's like, wow, there are a lot of things that go into making one of these games actually good. And when it's actually good, you don't notice literally any of them. You just flow.
Yeah. And sometimes you have fun with it. I did see one example from the new Theater Rhythm game where one of the songs has like this weird dance that's associated with it, and the beat map is lined up so that it is that dance, basically. So you can have fun with it too. It's not all thinking about it. You're like, how do I do the funny dance versus on like 4 notes?
I do wonder, I wish I had thought to research this before just now. I wonder how they made the DDR tracks. Like, did somebody have to do them in the office? I mean, other than QR. Like, or QA. QR. Yikes. Other than QA. Like, how is that created, right? Is there any version of it where someone who's making it has to do it? Or is it really just like you get used to what's doable in these things?
I don't know.
I have no idea, and I wish I knew. In my dreams, the DDR office is just all of them looking as fly as the like really pro DDR players make it look, just like laying down the tracks, and they're like, "Here it is, I did it." Just like choreographers. I'm sure that's not how it is, but I wish that it was. That was one joy of preparing for this podcast, by the way, was watching how many people make all of these games that like just like absolutely should not look cool.
Yeah, there's definitely, I was saying you saying there's like definitely like a performative aspect to rhythm games. And not just DDR, like any rhythm game. Like when you're watching someone get a full combo, that is like impressive immediately in a way that a lot of other game genres don't. Like you can watch someone who's really good at a game and be like, oh, they're really good at a game, but like watching that number go up as they're like, you know, that's like, it's a cool sort of performance and you're like, whoa, like immediately upon watching it versus like watching someone do like a cool headshot. It's like, oh yeah, whoa.
Yeah.
You know? So no, that difference in feeling.
It should be immediately apparent, that coolness. But even beyond that, like even beyond the like, I can't look away when someone has their full combo going, even when they're just pressing buttons, right? I'm like, man, I don't think I have ever looked cool doing Dance Dance Revolution in my entire life. Right? Like, and I had sort of just accepted that, like, okay, you call it Dance Dance Revolution, but like, it's not really. Like, it's not dance. Like, you aren't dancing. And then every once in a while I see videos of people doing it and looking cool. And I'm like, oh, man. Come on.
You have to really dedicate yourself to the DDR life, though, you know?
Or like, one of these videos I watched, I don't remember the name of the game, but there's some kind of newer arcade game that's popular in Japan, where it's kind of like DDR, except it's not really it's like you just have like an LED pad, and you just sort of have to hit feet at certain times, right? And it says left foot and right foot, but that doesn't really matter. Oh my god, these people were just like full on dancing, like full on like doing moves, and I was like, this is not fair. No, you can't do this. The whole point of these games is that like we all accept that like it's cool and it's impressive, but it doesn't look cool. And then it did, and I was upset. Or like when people are doing Beat Saber at a high, like Beat Saber shouldn't look cool. You're like waving your arms around in space. But like when people are playing at a really high level, it's like, dang, you do look cool. What's up with that?
Yeah.
Stop that.
Yeah.
I thought we all agreed that these games are kind of dorky.
No. Never.
It's so funny too, because it's like again, has anyone ever actually looked cool playing Guitar Hero? They probably have, but like probably. But like that's the whole draw. That was the whole Western draw of those games, right? Is the like, you're a rock star, but you don't actually have to learn anything.
Yeah.
Sort of appeal. Which is so interesting to me that like there hasn't been more leaning into that wish fulfillment in this genre.
Well, do you want to have 10 minutes to complain about how nobody has a sense of rhythm except for you?
I do. So this has come up a lot in articles about rhythm games recently. I think because Hi-Fi Rush and Hi-Fi Rush's creators have been particularly vocal about building in a lot of safeguards for people who don't have rhythm to play these games, to play the game. Like not just things that are like these are cool, like the whole thing. Like Hi-Fi Rush has a lot of stuff that I think on a game level is important for making sure everything sticks to the rhythm, right?
Yeah.
You can probably speak to this much more than me, but like everything pulsates to the beat. Even if you hit I'm sure it's not the X button, it's on an Xbox. Even if you hit the attack button off the beat, like he still does attack to the beat, your main character. You just don't get the bonus.
Yes.
So there's all of that.
The left button.
Great. The left.
I saw one of these it's not the left button, it's the button that's on the left on the face ones. I did see on that there is like a one button mode, and I was like, oh man, I should have turned that on. Because occasionally it will have like button prompts that's like, press this button at this time. Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't know the Xbox controller buttons very well. So this is where I would usually die.
I think it's too late for us too, because like I've had a Switch now for what, like 6 years, right? Something like that. Not quite, I guess 5 years and a bit. I think I know those controllers, but the buttons, but I still have to think about it.
Yeah, there was like a big climactic moment where I was having one of these and like it was like, why? Where's why? Oh god.
Special hard mode, just for the non-Xbox gamers.
The secret Emma difficulty mode that crops up unexpectedly every once in a while when I have to remember which one's the A button.
Speaking of unfair difficulty, they should have had an option where it's like, map it to PlayStation controls. Like, just show the PlayStation button that button would be.
Yeah.
Then I can do that.
Yeah.
Where's the mod for that? But beyond that, they also have a bunch of other features that are specifically to help people who don't have rhythm play the game. And that came up in a couple of other articles, not just as recent as Hi-Fi Rush's release, sort of throughout my research for this. People talking about how they hadn't really dived into rhythm games because they didn't have rhythm, or people thought that rhythm games are a niche genre because so many people don't have rhythm. And like, listeners, is that true? That can't be. Like, many of these articles are like, I'm a terrible dancer, and like I realize that a lot of this is tongue-in-cheek, but like, folks, these games just require you to like press the A button to the beat. Like, I understand being like, oh, there's a cap to how good I'm going to get at something like DDR, or how good I'm going to get at something like Beat Saber, where it's physical and it requires some like physical coordination. But for games like, I don't know, like Melody of Memory or whatever, something like that, in the parappa style of I press a button to the beat, are there really people that feel like they don't have the sense of rhythm to be able to do that? Like, I know, yes, but are they such a large population that it has marginalized rhythm games to a niche genre because of that? That's wild to me.
I don't know if it's because of that, but there's definitely people that don't have rhythm or have low senses of rhythm. And I think obviously that musical training will enhance your sense of rhythm more than people who have not ever studied music at all, right?
I get it.
You're making a face, but it's true.
I know that. No, I'm mostly just thinking about, like, I recognize this all comes from the fact that, like, I have been doing music. I've done music my entire life, right? So it's just hard for me to conceptualize not being able to, like, clap eighth notes.
I had a couple of, I would usually, so one of the things is, you know, if you're really having trouble identifying it, you can turn on and off a visual, like, beat map, like just with one button press. You can turn it on and off when you need it or don't need it. And I would find when I had it off, I felt like I sometimes got stuck on the off beat. So I wasn't actually, I felt like I was hitting it on the beat, but it wasn't where it actually wanted me to be.
Right.
And so I would turn it on to like get an idea of like, okay, it wants me to start here. Okay, I get it now. If that makes sense.
Which is totally fine, to be clear. That's a totally normal rhythm thing. So many of these articles seem to be going for an even lower level of rhythm comprehension.
Some people don't. Some people don't.
No. I know that. I'm sorry, listeners. I hope I'm not alienating you. I just want you to explain to me what that's like. Like, can you sing along to music in the car? Like,
well, that's not necessarily beat.
I guess not.
I Googled it really quickly. There's like a BBC Science Focus of like a very tiny study, so take this as it is. But they're saying that 3 factors that they identified were short-term auditory memory, the ability to sense regular timing structure in sounds, and musical training. And also that it's not like some people have beat and some people don't have beat.
Sure.
And more that some people are bad at sensing it and some people are better at sensing it. So it's more like a spread of ability rather than like an on and off function that you might have.
It's hard for me as someone who's like, I was never like the best singer, but I was definitely always the best sight reader.
I mean, it's like more than even singing, like you learned a lot of theory and stuff, right?
I guess, yeah. I don't feel like I learned well, whatever. I wonder how much of it comes down to rhythm games are perceived as casual games, right? And so because of that, there's a larger population who might be interested in them, who, whether for rhythm reasons or even more so for they require a precision of input and a comfort with the controller, that although something like, I don't know, like a theater rhythm game, I'm gonna keep saying it weird, like might seem like the kind of game you could give to a newbie gamer, right? They require enough like dexterity with the controller and familiarity with like how to do inputs that it kind of like people start to feel like they don't have enough rhythm for it, when I wonder how much of it is they just don't feel facile enough with games. Maybe. Because these games might appeal to someone who is intimidated by Call of Duty. Yeah. When's Call of Duty gonna make a rhythm game? Do you think we can get them to agree to that? Like don't give them ideas. Be like, we'll give Sony the Call of Duty rhythm game. See, it's fine. Anyway, that's my rant. That's my rant about rhythm. Is as a rhythm haver, it's hard for me to imagine not having rhythm. I'm unable to perfectly put myself in your shoes, rhythmless listener. I'm sorry. My empathy limits. They're only so great. Although I will say on that front, one quick thing that was interesting in reading about this was being reminded how like easy mode in rhythm games is sometimes actually harder than like medium mode.
Because it's like slower.
It's like so simple, and sometimes you lose, like in the interest of just like scaling back the number of inputs, you lose like inputs that would be helpful in kind of maintaining the flow of things. Mm-hmm. So maybe the problem for these people who think they don't have rhythm is they should just go up to medium mode and suddenly it'd be like, oh, now there's the beat when I'm not doing just like one button press every 3 seconds. I get it now.
Anyway, I definitely struggled with the character action part of Hi-Fi Rush more than in the platforming. Oh boy, I struggled with the platforming. Me going into boss fights with 1 HP because I fell off a ledge like 20 times.
Can't wait to hear about that in 3 weeks. All right, last little thing. What genre do you wish would get mashed up with rhythm games more?
Me?
Yeah. I'm thinking about it too, and I'm asking you first. We've got like our rhythm shooters. We've got classic rhythm games.
I was like, what games haven't had it yet? And I was like,
Yeah.
tactics games. And I was like, that would suck.
That'd be hilarious.
That would suck.
What would that even look like?
Like, you have to make an action every beat or you lose hit points.
Yo.
So you have to think really fast.
That would be wild. That would be wild.
You'd have to simplify it down a little bit because you couldn't do as much math as, say, Fire Emblem. But
yeah. That's hilarious.
that I don't actually want that. That sounds awful.
It sounds funny.
I think walking simulators should just be rhythm games.
You should say that again because you fully yawned.
I think walking simulators should just be rhythm games.
That could actually be kind of dope. You're like if you're like a dancing walking simulator, that would be kind of dope.
Yeah.
Like Parappa the Rappa, first person.
Horror games. When you miss a note, you get every time you miss a note, you get jump scared.
That seems like it would be good. That one though, like the difficulty floor for that would be really high.
Yeah.
Because once you get one jump scare, like it'd be impossible. You have to like brace yourself through the jump scare, right? Like,
yeah.
Otherwise you just get stuck in this endless cascade.
Yeah.
Well, I welcome more rhythm games. I enjoy a rhythm game. I don't play like tons and tons and tons of them, but I do like them. I mean, we got way too into Melody of Memory, so I welcome. We all know that we have great fondness for Atlantica here at Talk This NYC HQ Atlantica from Kingdom Hearts 2.
Sephiroth.
Give me my Sephiroth, my One Winged Angel, Swim This Way mashup. Please. Throw Baka Mitai in there too.
That.
Machine Gun Kiss. Machine Gun Kiss is the best one. Anyway, listeners, do you have favorite rhythm games that you've played or genres you wish rhythm games would get mashed up with? Do you have thoughts on what makes a rhythm game good or difficult? Or why the Guitar Hero bubble burst? Was it all just the 2008 recession that caused an early end to Guitar Hero's reign? Some have speculated. Anyway, if you have thoughts on any of this or anything else we talked about this week, you should follow us on social media and let us know. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, and read our blog featuring long-running series Clip Grade Boyfriend and Split Screen. But finally, if you enjoy the show, you should subscribe so you never miss an episode on Sundays. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, wherever you find podcasts, wherever you found Talk This today. Subscribe. Next week, I actually know the games.
Yeah.
Isn't that fun for me? Next week, we're going to be talking about Trine and Signalis, which I try to call Pentiment every time. I don't know why.
I played them both on Xbox Game Pass around the same time, so that's probably why.
They're just like Latin-y sounding names on Xbox Game Pass. Anyway, Trine and Signalis. So look forward to that. And then the following week, probably, will be our PAX episode.
And then we'll have 7 weeks of gaming, which is always
too many weeks.
It's
okay.
Packed.
I haven't gamed that much because I haven't wanted to start it. All these games I wanted to start, and Click Boyfriend was out of town, and I was like, oh, he'll fall behind if I start this. Like, he won't know what's happening.
I think I've maybe completed 3 games since.
Uh-oh. All right, well, look forward to that whenever that is, sometime in mid-April. Man, time is flying by. That's it for our show. Thanks for listening. Emma, should we try to say something to the beat
What beat?
I don't know.
I don't know what beat our outro music is, unfortunately. So
I know. I wish we could do it to the outro music. That would be that's too bad. That's too cool for us. Emma, do you have a sign off then? You shot mine down.
This week I hope that your public dancing is cool.
Here, I'll try to do it. Isn't that how it goes?